In the meeting.
Way to do it. Three,
Let's see your-
two,
One.
different.
Oh, God, it's never
Okay.
different.
Welcome to the April 2025 meeting of Community Board 7's Health and Human Services Committee. I'm Ken Coughlin. Maybe we can go around the room and committee members say, I'm the co-chair with Saralee Evans.
I should say that. I'm the co-chair, Saralee. Did that well.
That is very good.
I'm Louisa Craddock, and I'm a member of this committee.
Rosenfield, I'm a proud member of
William
What's
Ortiz, member of the committee.
Michael Molinari, member of the committee. Sheldon, Floyd, member of the committee.
Gil Tauber speaking.
Presenter.
Presenter, yes.
Yes, yes. And we have another.
I'm
Jami.
Jami Floyd. I am not a member of the committee, but I am a member of Community Board 7.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
And Michael Cantor, I'm public member of the committee.
And we have people online?
Not for that, not,
Oh, somebody's waving from over
Yeah,
there.
But they're not the member of the
Okay,
committee.
okay. So first we have to
Adopt.
approve the agenda.
Agenda.
So moved.
All in favor?
All in favor? Okay.
Okay.
Looks like it passes. So for our first agenda item, this was something that was brought to my attention by Mr. Tauber, who's a friend. It was an incident that happened in his building that seemed very concerning because, as he pointed out, thousands, if not tens of thousands of people in this community are elderly and live alone. And this involves somebody who died alone at the age of 106. And I don't want to tell too much more,
Yeah,
because
okay.
Gil's going to tell the story, but
Okay.
when we have experts who have come to explain the law to us also. So
Well, yeah. I don't think I have any particular professional expertise in this. My expertise is just being as a member of the affected demographic. My name is Gilbert Tauber. It's all right if I read this?
Please.
Sure. My name is Gilbert Tauber. I live at 320 Riverside Drive, which is a large co-op building at 104th Street. I'm speaking today on behalf of myself and several other older people in 320 and nearby buildings. We're very concerned about recent events following the death of a neighbor who passed away peacefully in our apartment at the age of 106. 2 home health aides were present. She was not under home hospice care, but she was under the care of a physician who visited her at home. Observing that the woman had died, one of the home health aides called a friend of the deceased who called 911. The police and the EMTs responded. It's not clear what happened next, but after the body was removed, the police sealed the apartment. Even the woman's own daughter, who lives in California and is her only heir, as well as designated executor, was told that she would not be allowed to enter until certain procedures were complied with, a process that she was told could take 4 months. She has since had to retain a lawyer in an attempt to gain entry. It should be noted that the deceased had made a will and had a readily reachable next of kin who was also the executor designated in that will. It's understandable that such a death might require a determination by the medical examiner that the death was from natural causes. However, absent foul play or intestacy, sealing the apartment for 4 months seems wildly excessive. For those of us who live alone, it's frightening to think that our deaths might trigger a situation costing our surviving family members great anguish and many thousands of dollars. This is not a trivial problem. We are among thousands of people in Community Board 7 who are in this situation, living alone, having next of kin who live elsewhere, sometimes in other states or abroad, having made wills, having designated executors, often having made advanced funeral arrangements. In short, having done what we can to reduce the shock and burden to our loved ones, and also to avoid an unnecessary drain on the assets that we hope to pass on. Ameliorating this situation will probably require some changes in existing regulations and procedures, as well as some precautions on the part of us prospective corpses. I should believe- That's all of us. I should note that some years ago, Bloomingdale Aging in Place, I hope you're all familiar with that organization, distributed emergency information forms together with magnetized plastic pouches that were designed to be placed on one's refrigerator door. Many of us still have these. These were given out in 2011. Here's mine. It has information about my next of kin, my doctors, the location of my will, my prepaid funeral arrangements. Question: are police and other first responders instructed to look for instructions like this? Second, what else should go in that packet? More generally, I think we need to know what rules emergency responders are required to follow when they find that a person has died alone at home and not under medical supervision. What laws and regulations apply? Who are they required to notify? What triggers the sealing of an apartment? Who is regarded as a legitimate resident of the apartment? Who is recognized as a family member? What is the definition of medical supervision? When must a medical examiner be called in? Is anyone other than a medical examiner or health provider allowed to make a determination of death? If an apartment is sealed, what or who determines when it can be unsealed? When is the estate referred to the public administrator? If a will is later found, is there a procedure for releasing it to the executor designated in that will? There are probably many more questions that will come up in discussions, but I hope this list will serve as a helpful point of departure.
Very exhaustive.
Okay, well, to help answer that, we just by luck, the
Yes.
Manhattan chief clerk of the surrogate, Manhattan Surrogate's office happened to be walking by. And so we snagged her.
Wow,
So,
wow. Well, I could probably spend 5 hours answering all your questions.
I'm sure.
So we'll do the best we can. The situation with your neighbor is not unusual.
Really?
Yes, as you can imagine, during COVID,
Okay.
it was happening 200 times a month as opposed to 20 times a month. It's what regulations require, and it's what the law is. If a person dies in their apartment and they live alone, the body, after the medical professional shows up and declares them dead, and the body is moved to the medical examiner's office, the apartment has to be sealed to safeguard the decedent's assets. Now, in the situation you said there was a daughter, but you and I don't know what the will says. We don't know if the daughter was not included in the will, right? We don't know if she left all her money to charity. So to protect the decedent's assets, the apartment is sealed. And unsealing could happen the same day family member shows up to court and says, and they're the next of kin, my family member's apartment's been sealed, can you help us unseal it? If you're the next of kin and you have priority, there's a whole set of questions that we ask, then that same day, you will be given an order to have the apartment unsealed. So the 4 months is not correct. There's always shortcuts to everything, right? And we have a help center, a very helpful help center.
A help center.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and it's staffed by a court attorney and an employee, and it's to help pro se or non-represented people with the process, because surrogate's court can be daunting. It's it's a majestic building, so you should all come and visit us. It's beautiful. It's a landmark building, yeah. So, but it's a whole new language that we speak in there. And so to demystify the whole process, we had a help center created for regular, ordinary people to come in who don't have lawyers, and we will explain the process, and we will help them with the applicable applications to complete. And like I said, the same day, it can be done, it can be unsealed. We have, it's such a usual occurrence that we've even created a pamphlet that says, has the police department sealed your family members?
Okay.
So we're gonna leave those.
Better than swag. How many?
Yeah. We have a bunch of those.
Uh-huh.
And they were so useful that my court helped the other boroughs
Mhm.
create similar ones. Because we understood, at least I understood when I came into to the surrogates court 14 years ago, that no one knew anything about surrogates court, right? When I first walked in, there weren't even signs to where you're supposed to go.
Can I
So
take a
that's
few of
changed.
these?
Yeah. Yeah, and you can. And I personally have written to every captain of every precinct in Manhattan and submitted a bunch of those and a letter that says, please distribute these to family members when apartments are sealed and dead bodies found in an apartment, so that the family knows what they have to do. But still, family members come in with barely legible old copies of information that is not good anymore. And it has old telephone numbers and it has forms that you don't need anymore. And we've tried to educate the police so that they can in turn educate the public. But so it doesn't always happen.
So
Yes.
is there a way, if somebody dies alone and like if you call the funeral home directly, for example, how do you prevent the police from getting involved? I guess that's the question.
No, you can't. If there's a dead body, the police have to get involved.
Why is that? I'm thinking like if somebody dies in the hospital.
No,
they
that's
don't-
different,
but-
yeah.
But I'm asking,
Right.
like, why, is that a law or is that
Or if hospice care. If
Yeah,
it was hospice
exactly,
care,
like, why, I mean, when I write a district kid in the hospital, there's no police there, because I see them and they're died, so
Right.
like, that's, why,
I
I'm
think
just
that
asking
the
the question, like,
police,
why do they have to?
well, I think that's, you'd have to talk to a local captain, but I guess it's to
I'm not
make
gonna
sure
be-
that
yeah,
they were
I
murdered.
understand that.
Yeah, I mean, that's.
I understand that, but
Yeah, that there's
like,
no
if you're,
foul
let's say,
play.
so let's say I go to my mom's apartment, I find her and she's passed away, right? I mean, like, do I have to call, why do I have to call the police? I mean, I'm there and I'm there, like, that's the.
But they don't know that you didn't kill her.
Okay. So, I'll call the funeral home first and then see what happens. I mean, it seems like, why do they have to get involved? I don't understand.
Well,
Well, even if you call the funeral home, because I've had this experience, the first thing that they do tell you is that, did you notify 911? So it becomes, a very circular argument.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
one of the steps that must happen.
Gil, did you have a question?
yeah, well, I think, if the person was, actually died alone there, yeah, that's understandable, that there has to be some determination made that there was no foul play.
Right,
And that requires, do the police always call somebody from the medical examiner?
yes.
Yeah, so the medical examiner person comes up and then
Right.
the remains can be taken away to the funeral home. But these situations come up that I've heard of, where somebody dies and a person shows up who is not a family member and was now if a person shows up who is a family member, let's say a child shows up, hey, I heard my mother passed away. I'm the daughter, has ID and everything. That's one thing. But maybe was even a person present at the time of death who was not next of kin. I've heard of two cases, one in which there were home health aides in the apartment and the police wouldn't let the home, and they sometimes stay overnight. And the home health aide was not allowed to retrieve her personal belongings.
Right, that's wrong. Because how do the police know what belongs to the home health care aide?
A nightgown?
It's her
Her
wallet with her-
nightgown, you know, her,
Her wallet with her ID in it.
No,
no. They're not going to engage in that. They're just gonna seal it, get everybody out and seal it to
get everybody
safeguard.
out. In other words, they find people in the apartment and they say, and they're not next of kin,
Right, or they don't live with
They
the
don't
person.
live-
Yes,
or
even
they
a
can't
health.
prove they live there.
Right. Like if somebody lives with their child, their grown child, and the older person dies, the child's not gonna be kicked out. He or she gets to stay in their apartment. But you're talking about situations when the person lives alone and there's nobody else on the lease.
Or there's a person in the apartment who is not next of kin. And I'm thinking of a case in which a woman had a student living with her, rented a room to a student,
Yes.
partly as just feeling more secure to have somebody else around.
Right,
And this student who had all her belongings there
No.
was kicked out.
that's right.
So
That's
if
absolutely right.
you had a question, but I'll ask.
I did, yeah, just, I guess one is a follow-up to that, so it's the person that's living alone in that instance where someone was renting a room, why does that not qualify as living with someone? Is it because they're not on like the lease?
Right,
Maybe that's it. If they're on the lease, it's okay.
yes.
And
If
then,
you could show the police at that time when they show up that your name is on the lease, the police are obligated to let you stay there and they won't seal the apartment.
What if there's an acknowledgement?
What?
Who has a lease
I
lying
mean,
around?
I give my police
Exactly.
license.
Exactly.
You gotta
And
take a
your-
picture.
But your child is rarely on your, my daughter is not on my
Yeah,
lease.
exactly.
To get into the
Yeah,
sealed apartment.
they should be.
to see what it is.
Yeah,
Well,
or
you
they can show ID that
Yes, you better
has,
not die.
if they have a state ID with their, that
Okay.
same address and apartment number, that could work too.
I have my daughter's name,
Yes.
name and address and so forth on here. Would the police be instructed to look for information in a pocket on the refrigerator?
Especially between 100th Street and 106th Street,
Why?
because that's where the,
BAIP.
yeah,
What?
the organization,
Oh,
they, blocking.
Bloomingdale
Bloomingdale
ADA.
The place.
Yeah.
Meets at the Marseille on 103rd Street, and people in that area are involved.
Whether a police officer seeing a sign that says emergency contact will
Yeah.
pull it off, maybe.
So
I don't
we
know
should
whether
know
they're.
from the police captain, I mean, we should need to make some inquiry from the Noreen Lazarus, right?
Commander of the 24th.
Commander of the
I
24th precinct.
will say that I reached out to the 24th
Yeah.
and called their community affairs person, left a message, didn't get a
Uh-huh.
Okay, I will shortly be becoming their chaplain.
Oh.
So I will make sure to
Oh,
communicate.
good.
The chaplain of the 24th
Yeah.
precinct. Oh,
So,
Okay.
Jami.
Somebody mentioned hospice in the
Yeah.
course of all of this.
yeah.
Does that have any impact on the outcome? Or
Because
is
when you
that
have hospice,
red herring?
that's when somebody lives with, stays or takes care of you, but they don't necessarily live there. Yeah, so they still seal it if you're,
Okay, so that has
But-
no impact on what we're talking.
no,
But my understanding is if you're under medical supervision when you die, which would be, then hospice,
Would include hospice care, home hospice care.
it would be like dying in a hospital. That was my understanding.
and the police don't get involved.
Right.
Well,
I don't know. Yeah.
my wife died under home hospice care, and the home hospice representative, who was a nurse practitioner, said, when your wife passes, call us. Whatever you do, don't call 911. And so we followed our instructions. Yeah.
And what did they do?
What?
What did hospice do? as
Oh,
opposed
well, a
to-
person showed up within like 45 minutes. She, ascertained that my wife had indeed passed away. She then called it into the physician at her agency. The physician prepared the information for, I guess, the death certificate. And then the first thing she did after that was to gather up all the opiates and flush them down the toilet, which I understand is no longer recommended.
But your apartment wouldn't be sealed because you live
Because you
there.
live there.
Yeah, I live there, yeah.
Right.
Yes.
I had a question for the gentleman. I'm so sorry. How many days did this person was dead for? Do you happen to recall?
I'm sorry?
How many days was this person dead for in the apartment?
Before they were found.
Your
Before they
name.
were
Oh,
found?
no. She
She was not alone.
there were home health aides present at the
Ah.
time.
When she died.
But they weren't residents of the unit.
They
Right,
weren't
they go
residents
back
of the
one,
unit, they
so
were,
she's
you know,
affected by
alternate.
Okay.
And she said, she was obviously frail. And she told the home health aide, I think I'm gonna lie down and rest for a while. And she lay down and she died, just like that, which is the way to go. I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
at 106.
I'll sign up to that.
Yeah.
So I guess my thought exercise, I was just thinking, I misunderstood. I thought this person may have died for about a week.
No, it wasn't one of those cases.
But I'm just wondering now if there's other ways to notify, because my wife's family's from Chicago, a neighbor died and it took like almost 2 or 3 weeks before. And this is like house, like detached house.
Yes, different.
And the dog went too, obviously the money for the dog for family. But I wondered about if there's any way for the electrical companies, they don't have Con Edison, to notice a stagnant pattern of electrical uses, like no appliances turned on in the morning, no appliances turned off in the middle of the day for washing machine. So if an electrical company like Con Edison notices, hey, there's no movement in this place, there's no change in electricity.
Yeah.
Could we notify someone?
Well,
If
but
you're on
people could be on vacation.
Yeah.
That's true too.
Yeah. And in Manhattan
I would
where
rather
it's,
be notified for a death in the family than not be notified when I'm on vacation. But it's just one of those things where you call in and check, that I would just like to propose that maybe something we can consider to reach out.
Well, in our discussion among us folks in the building,
We have data.
we're aware that one can, if one is under home hospice care, and we've all known people who've been in that situation, you can avoid this, provided you don't make the mistake of calling 911. That, this may hinge on what constitutes medical supervision. So there could be, some alternative service that monitors people.
But suppose an apartment is sealed and I'm a daughter who comes in from out of town and I am able to go down to circuit court. Do I need to get a lawyer or can I navigate the system?
depends. It's a perfect lawyer answer, right? It depends. It depends on your state of mind. It depends on how much you want to deal with the paperwork.
Is there a lot?
It depends on whether the decedent had a lot of children, whether you know all the children of the decedent, you know where they're located, you know their addresses. It depends on the value of the estate. If it's the law classified, makes a distinction between what we call a small estate and not a small estate. And a small estate is anything that's worth below $50,000 and there's no real estate involved. And there's no future cause of action that's going to be happening. Like if the person was crossing the street, got hit by a car, and you're gonna sue the car owner, you can't do a small estate. But if the person had less than $50,000 in a bank account, in a car, an investment account, then that's a 3-page affidavit. And as long as it's the next of kin, the whole thing costs $1 to file. It's the only thing that costs $1 in New York these days, not even the Dollar Tree's $1. And it's relatively painless.
How do you get it
and easy.
unsealed after that, though? Do you have to call the police and have someone come unseal it?
So then the court gives you a special certificate that you take to the local precinct and you wait for them to accompany you to the sealed department, or they'll say, I'll meet you at the sealed department. They usually have the key. And once they're in front of that, they'll break the seal and they'll give you the key and they'll say.
It happens on the weekend, you have to wait till
Yeah,
Monday?
the police, for us, yes.
But the thing is, it sounds.
But you have to get a death certificate. So before you do anything, because you just can't come to court and say they're dead.
Right.
We need proof.
That takes 10 days at least.
No,
No, the funeral home gives you one.
Yeah.
No,
Michael has
that could take the next day.
Oh, the extras, I think, take.
We're trying
The
to-
extras.
Michael,
The funeral home supplies you with a certain
Yeah.
amount.
Yes, and then
this
you
is a
have-
very
It's-
unruly. group.
I know, I'm trying to provide structure. We'll see how we do. I think part of what we try to do, whether it's committee or the community board at large, we always try to take actionable, like actions when we can, whether it's resolutions, whatever it might be. And so, obviously the whys of why these things exist, that's a little bit beyond us. I think I understand the perspective of both parties and all parties in here, but particularly sort of the police perspective or the judicial perspective of needing to follow law and order here. That being said, in other committees, what I've heard is that our court systems are overwhelmed at the moment. There aren't enough judges, there aren't enough, staff members to get everything going. Can you talk to how that might relate to your work and specifically this type of work? And is there something where we can go back to our elected officials or the city or state and say, we need to increase funding to decrease the backlog? Are people going into surrogate's court and struggling to get appointments in a timely manner because there's too much of a volume of work? Or is it only a struggle with navigating paperwork that they're not familiar with because you do it once or twice in your life?
Right. I think it's the latter. Well, there's just one surrogate per county in New York. Yes, except for Manhattan and Kings County. So except for Manhattan and Brooklyn, we have 2 judges to handle all of Manhattan. And Kings has 2. All the other counties have 1. So that goes to show you how busy we are, right? And we could probably use another surrogate, but that's probably beyond the scope of this. But
we might,
right. But the thing about surrogates court, it's a very unique court in that I like to say that it's quasi-administrative in nature. What does that mean? That means that if you complete the petition, you come in and you drop off your petition asking that an executor be appointed to the estate of Mary Jane. You drop off your petition to a clerk, and the clerk will look at every single thing you've written in that petition. They will look at the will, they will examine it, they will see if there's any irregularities. If everything is perfect, they sign off on it, and they have years of experience, and they tell the surrogate it's good enough. The judge's staff will also give it a review, and if they're satisfied that it's in good shape, they put it in front of the judge and they say, it's good, sign the decree. The judge signs the decree, it goes back to the clerk, letters testamentary issue, you buy a certificate, and you're done. 85% of the matters in surrogate's court are like that. You never, ever have to see the judge. For small estates, for matters less than 50, the judge doesn't even get involved. I get involved as the chief clerk. My signature is on all those certificates. The judge knows that, and the legislature has figured out that the clerks know enough that they know when the affidavit's completed correctly, and the judge is never bothered with those types of proceedings. And that's a huge chunk of the work that happens in surrogate's court. When the judge gets involved when there's a fight happening, when there's a child out of wedlock, or the siblings are not getting along and they can't agree on how to divide the property, or a lawyer hasn't gotten paid, or the trust needs to be refunded and nobody's funding it anymore. It's just, once there's a huge fight, then that's when the surrogate gets involved. Otherwise, 85% of the things just right through. When the judge is on calendar, as we say, if you go into their offices, you'll see the stacks of files. And they're there every night signing away, because the experienced clerks have reviewed it, her staff has reviewed it, and so she's satisfied, and she'll just sign. So it's easy.
But in a sort of a perfect world, but also a regrettable one, which someone say passes on a Monday, how quickly, in an instance where they pass a loan, and so they have more than $50,000 in their estate, is it something by Tuesday that we are unsealed, or is it a more reasonable timeline here? Like, what is?
Well,
the
you-
minimum?
We're restricted by when the person walks in with a death certificate. If the Department of Health takes 3 days to issue a death certificate,
I'm just saying, like.
then they have to wait 3 days before they can come to surrogate.
Let's say
court
you
with
have
the
a
death
death
Yeah, so you come.
Yes, and the apartments, it's the same day. You come in the morning, but
It can be.
within
done.
an hour, you'll be
So
walking out.
in the instance that,
But provided it's not complicated,
Yes, yeah,
right?
yeah.
That it's
Okay.
easy, plain vanilla,
Yeah.
the husband predeceased, it was only the wife, and she was survived by 3 children. And she had whatever she had, it doesn't matter. If you need immediate access to the apartment, that same day we'll give it
So
to you.
even with your current, sorry, I don't mean to take up time, but even with your current workloads, your current capacity,
Yes,
current staffing,
yes,
it is possible in a world where all documents are in order,
yes.
there's no
And
complications.
we give priority, same day service to those 3 types of cases. One, when there's a sealed apartment. One, when there's a safe deposit box and you think there's a will inside the safe deposit box. And one, when there's a sealed apartment and you think, you're pretty sure that there's a will, life insurance, or burial instructions readily available. The cops will unseal the apartment, stand there, watch you as you go around looking for the will or the insurance or the burial instructions, or maybe in your case, the emergency contact information. And you'll walk out with the emergency contacts, with the life insurance. You won't walk out with the will because the police take it from you and have it delivered to the court.
Sure.
So it's the same thing.
But there's, Can't
I'm only
always
speaking
be-
for Manhattan,
Right.
right? Because each borough is a little different. So I can tell you, guaranteed, you come in the same day, even and the cashier closes at 4, so technically she can't take money yet. We'll call them up and say, the family's here from Ohio, they're just signing the bottom, please wait for them. And they'll, wait.
But I did a little research and found that apparently there is a subspecialty of the law. We'll help you unseal apartments.
Really?
Yeah, I found
Will
it.
help you to.
I sent it. I sent you the
Yeah,
link.
yeah, there's
There's a service for everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
So-
lawyers who
That sounds like-
specialize in
And-
getting your
but also-
apartment.
I've
I
never
mean,
seen that.
Gil's friend or the woman in his
Yeah.
building had to hire a lawyer. So it can't, and I don't know whether
Well,
she
you
needed
don't know-
to hire.
you
a
Well,
lawyer.
know-
of course, she's in California.
Oh, there you
She
go.
didn't come here?
Well, she can't, she would come here if she could get into
Yeah,
the
but
apartment, but she
She's
can't get
doing
into
this
the
long
apartment.
Oh, so
Yeah, when
she-
you're
she
doing
didn't-
But this is not a less than $50,000 case.
Right.
And, we're talking about, we're in Manhattan, a borough where a great many people, a high proportion of people live in co-ops and condos, so there is real estate involved, which
Right.
automatically takes it out of your simple
Right,
thing.
right.
Which
But it's
of
still-
course is also an argument for a third surrogate, right?
But I think like, obviously this is a very specific instance.
Yeah.
We don't know the details of it.
Right.
Obviously, you know more than the rest of us, but
Yeah.
none of us have the full details. of it.
Right,
But
right.
I think
Right,
the crux of what I was trying to bring up here is if there were things that were sort of slowing down this process or inhibiting this process, I understand, I can only imagine from a family member's perspective, the frustration they might feel and sort of how overwhelmed you might be dealing with paperwork, but paperwork and bureaucracy is ultimately the stuff that provides the structure for our society. And
right.
the processes for police departments and our laws are there to keep everything organized. So while it's frustrating in the moment, it's also there for reasons that people don't get away with crimes and stuff
Sure.
like that. I think if there was
Right,
something that we could say, yes, we are underfunded, yes, we are understaffed, there's a way that we can make these things
Well,
easier.
I would take it a little step further and say, is there a way to cross every T and dot every I? And to sort of, the same way that you can, do a pre-need burial
Yeah.
thing. And,
What?
you can actually make all your burial preparations or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
beforehand. Would there be a way for somebody to say, I have an executor, I have a will, this is who they are, this is who my next of kin is, and file that some way before they die?
Oh, that's an interesting.
Yeah, there is a provision in the law that you can file it in surrogate's court, and it costs you $45. the trick is though, you have to tell your relatives it's there because we have files filled with what they're called wills for safekeeping. And nobody knows, the family doesn't know
Is it
it's
the
there.
original will? or
Yes.
copy?
The original.
The original will.
Yes, so you have to I tell people the best thing to do is either give the original will to your proposed executor or tell them where it is. So they'll know where to find it. Don't leave it in the safe deposit box. Maybe leave it with your lawyer, but then the lawyer hopes that the family will hire him or her to do it. Leave it open, leave it somewhere, or better yet, give away your money before you die.
Down to 50,000.
But don't, even if you did all that paperwork in advance, don't you still have that original problem of you have to have the apartment sealed because the daughter might live in California, somebody has to establish who they are specifically, or that they were home health aides and one doesn't know exactly what belongs to them and what belongs to the deceased. So you still would have to seal the apartment, wouldn't you?
Yeah, if the person lived alone, yeah, the police are obligated to seal the apartment to safeguard.
Unsealed.
Yes.
pretty
So we're
quickly.
back to the,
But
do you-
there
I
was
think
one
what
day,
you're
one
saying is-
day unsealed is a possibility.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a scenario now. It happens, my daughter happens to be here in New York right now, but she's visiting, she is Canadian. She lives in Vancouver. She's a Canadian citizen. If she's notified that I've died, it's gonna take her some time to
Yeah, especially.
get through,
especially-
especially with the police.
Right.
Who knows, we may be at war with Canada,
Right.
at that time.
Right.
And
what's the rush for somebody? You want to make sure that the daughter gets access, not
Right.
just anybody, right? So
yeah,
it's good that it's sealed so that nobody else gets in.
but I think, well, what we've discussed, I was advised that the best thing to do is to leave the will with a lawyer, which is what I've done. And I've told my daughter, if you hear that I've gone, call this lawyer, and they've got the will, and they can start on it, and then tell you when is a good time to come. They can, I think, estimate.
Right. Well, when you do it that way with a lawyer, it does take 3 to 4 months before they get access to the apartment.
Well, that's interesting. Why does it take much longer with a lawyer?
Because lawyers don't know the shortcuts that we know in the help center. Like, we would say, start small.
How's he not suggesting that I?
Yeah, we would say to a pro se person, start small so that we can give you immediate access to the apartment, so that you can look through all your father's mail and
Yeah.
look through it. And then when you do petition for full letters so that we can appoint you as the executor, you'll have a better idea of the true value of your father. Because most people don't know what your true value is, right? They have an idea, it's like, well, I think the apartment, it's a 2-bedroom co-op, and I don't know, the last time somebody sold theirs was 2 years ago, and they got $500,000, but theirs was renovated. My dad hasn't renovated in years, so maybe his is, they don't know any of that, right? I don't really know about my dad's retirement account. So they have maybe a ballpark, but if they got immediate access to your apartment, right, then they could have it even better, they can make a more educated guess, right? So if they were to come to the help center, or they had a lawyer that knew better, he or she would say, let's start small, and then we can increase. Yes, you're not only limited to one file. Sorry.
Just a simple personal thing. I sat down with my kids, my wife and I, and we went through everything and anything. And they know exactly where everything is, and they have keys to everything, and so on. We're not planning on going anyplace. If we were closer to that time and we knew it, we probably wouldn't, because we'd be nervous and we don't want to think of that. Said, while we're okay, this is what it is, and if things need to be updated, we will let you know.
That's great, but not everybody plans for death.
Right.
Not everyone plans for death, right? And death could happen in an
Anytime.
instant, at any time, right?
Right, yeah.
So it's those times where it happens unexpectedly that people have
And,
to
and we have
know what to do.
envelopes which tell first call list, second call list. Why? Because when my mother passed away, she was, my father predeceased her. She'd given me an envelope 20 years before with the keys. Only one phone number was different, and there were like 17 cards. And it made, oh my God, it made things so easy. I said, gonna make sure our kids don't have to
That's great.
deal with, you know,
Yes.
what we
That's
didn't have to
great.
deal with.
Yes.
It's a big thing.
Jamie,
Okay, I have two very simple questions. So it sounds as though you're suggesting that the original, for efficiency's sake, the original will best would be kept at wills for safekeeping at your office.
No, I didn't say that. I said
Okay,
that.
can you tell me what you
I said the better thing to do is to tell the executor that's listed there or some other family member where the will is and that it should be in the apartment or somewhere
Well, you said it-
reachable.
Okay.
If
said
if you file it in the court, you have to then make sure the family and everyone who's named it
Understood.
and knows that it's in the court
Right.
and that they have to come look for it.
Right, but I thought I understood you to say that if it's with a lawyer, it could take longer. If it's in the apartment, it could get sealed. So the best place, it sounds, would be with you guys, as long as everybody knows it's
As
there.
long as everybody knows it's here.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
yes.
Number two, you mentioned, just want to clarify, number two, you mentioned your health center many times. Is there any way to access the health center other than walking through the doors of your very beautiful building?
No,
No online?
No.
No phone number?
no, because there's just
Carrier
two
pigeon.
people that work there. And if they're helping the public and the phone's ringing, they're not gonna stop helping who's
Okay,
there.
so you
to
gotta
answer
walk
the
through the front door. Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
And someone asked about the public administrator, right? And when does the public administrator
Yeah.
get involved? And what is the function of the public administrator? So that's somebody that you can call also to come be a speaker at your meetings. There's a commissioner called, the commission, I guess, she's called the public administrator, but she's also a commissioner for the city of New York. And her function is to, I like to say, to act like family when there is no family. Somebody who came, to America 80 years ago as a youngster, and they never married, they never had children, none of their relatives followed them, they were a loner, they lived alone, and that happens a lot in Manhattan, as you can imagine. And they die in their apartment, nobody knows that they die until the odor starts emanating through the hallways. The police are called, they try to do a wellness check, no one's there, they bang the door down and they find a dead person. Okay, then the body gets removed, the apartment gets sealed. The apartment will be sealed for months and months if there is no family to come to claim it. So that's when the landlord or a friend or a neighbor reports the death to the public administrator's office. And they have their own investigators and they have the authority to break the seal and go in. And they will go in and look to see if there's burial instructions, look to see if there's a will, look to see if there's life insurance, look to see if there's anything of value in the apartment, jewelry, fine art, statues, whatever they find, they haul it away. They keep it in their vault. They look through telephone books, they tell people, they try to figure out what the person's religion is, they try to bury them. If there's enough money, if not, they send them to Potter's Field, but they try to keep in line with the person's religion. And if there's enough money, they will bury them. And then they keep all the goods that they got. They auction them off at some time. They create an account in this person's name, and they just sit on the money until a family member comes forward and claims the money.
So,
And there's there's a whole business, talking about business, creating air finders who will figure out what ship he came in and how many years ago, what country they came from, what village. And then they'll look at the village and they'll yes, that's wild. Air finders, yes.
Yes, sir.
We've been talking about this for 45 minutes, it's very
Yes.
exciting, but we have a lot of stuff on the agenda. We should
Oh,
move on
yes,
to the,
okay.
Well,
to the next one.
schedule this till
All right, well,
7:30.
look, I don't, I appreciate the
No,
amount
we,
of time you devoted to
we
this.
allotted 7:30. We're adjourned the meeting.
There'll be no postmortems here.
Yes.
Right.
And I just want to say one thing about a will. Everyone says, oh, but it says it right here in the will. A will is not a will and an executor is not an executor until the court says that it's a will and you're an executor.
But what if you have a will that says, I want, my son, whatever, to be the executor?
Yeah, but you could
You have
supersede
to-
that will.
The will, until the judge says your son
So
is
it
the
has to be
executor.
presented.
Absolutely. That's why people write wills, to have them filed in court, not to walk around, not for the heirs to walk around with them. They write wills to have them filed in court so that they could be probated or proved to be an original will.
So is there, one of the issues here is when there's a long delay and you live in a cooperative apartment building or a condo or something, if the apartment is sealed, let's say, for several months, if there's some issue, every month that goes on, that's money, money that's not going to the heirs. It's
Exactly.
going,
Right. Yes,
going to thin air.
right. Remember I talked to you.
Instead of the air.
I talked to you, I talked to you about the petition and how the clerks review. The clerks will review and call the petitioner, the attorney and say, you're missing this, this, and this. As soon as you get us those three things, your file will be complete. Okay, thank you, goodbye. Or they'll email them. And then months go by and nothing happens. And we don't have the staff to call them back and say, on January 2nd, I called you and said, I'm missing 1, 2, 3, and it's April, and now we don't have the staff. So the file just sits there and the attorney forgets or moves or the file we don't have the staff to open those files up and
So
say,
one has to look for an attorney who specializes in prompt probate.
in trust and estates, yes.
Yeah.
In trust and estates, yes, yes. And there's people who law firms who regularly practice and they can do it with their eyes closed and they're good at it. And then there's some people who they say, oh, let me try. And those are a mess. And they have to.
That's true. in
Oh,
most
yeah.
areas.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you see.
I mean, really.
Yes.
All right, so do you have any advice for, I don't want to protract this. Do you have any parting advice for us folks in this situation?
In terms
They're
of-
not going to be simple wills or simple estates because we're co-ops.
Right.
And they're worth more.
Make sure, if you're going to write a will, make sure you get a trust and estates lawyer to write it. Don't do the self-help
No.
wills. They're horrible. They're horrible. We've seen enough of them that it just makes the people's eyes roll and say, it's almost better if you didn't write a will and just follow the laws of intestacy.
Yeah.
And not everybody has to write a will, right? You write a will because you want to appoint a particular person that you trust to be in charge of your money and to divide it the way you indicate in your will. But not everybody prepares for death that way, right? And the law recognizes it.
Yeah,
And the law tries to
distributes, yeah.
distribute it fairly.
Mhm.
So, and it depends on who the next of kin are, what we call distributees. So, and it follows natural, I would say, natural family tree. So if you're married, your spouse gets everything. If you're married and you have children, your spouse gets the first 50, the children, whatever's left over gets half, and then the wife gets half. If you have no spouse and you have no children, but your parents are alive, your parents share. If you don't have parents alive, then your siblings get it. If your sibling predeceased you, then your nieces and nephews. So it makes sense. So if you don't write a will, I recommend that people who don't have close family to write a will. But if you're married or you have children or you have siblings and you don't mind that they get the money, then it's okay not to write a will.
Any last questions?
But if you want to add anything?
Do I want to add anything? If you have, well, I'm thinking in terms of the sealed apartment, I have a set of keys for my mom's apartment, because if, God forbid, she doesn't answer the phone, I can go over there myself and check. And I don't have to call the cops to show up and check, because if they show up and check, they're going to immediately seal the apartment. But at least I have the keys. I can physically go into the apartment and see if my mom is there. Whether or not I'm a resident and I live in that apartment and I'm on the lease is a different issue.
Right.
But that just takes one other thing out
Yeah.
of the whole process.
Right.
So there's somebody you trust, give them the key. That way they can go check on you personally.
But the apartment would still be sealed.
Yes.
in
Yeah,
your
but-
case.
Yeah, but at least you don't have to call 911 to then have them go and then remove my mom's body and then have to wait to get access. At least I'll be there.
And while you're waiting, you can look through
I
the
can-
phone book
Yeah,
and
I
start
can
calling
look through all
people
the
and
stuff,
yes.
but to my mom's credit, I actually have the will, because I'm the executor.
Yeah.
So if anything happens to her, I know I'm not gonna have to stress out
But the
about
apartment
it.
would be sealed.
Yeah.
This is prior
Yeah.
to this.
And you'd have to
Yeah.
go to
Yeah,
her
Yes.
court.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But at least if I'm worried about her, I don't have to call 911 to do a welfare check. I can just go in there myself.
Right.
So, and I have the will because I'm the executor. So that's it. That's what I have to say.
So this is pretty fabulous.
Yeah, Gil, I hope this, it helps.
It helps a little bit. I would still like to talk to the police, you know.
Yeah,
Well,
but,
they didn't answer.
yeah,
I have to go.
but I think there, you know, maybe a way down the line for us to talk to them, I'm sure.
Yes, and if you do, ask them if they have these, because I've sent them.
Oh, all right,
these.
good, good, yeah.
I've sent them
Take
this so
'em
that
over.
they can give them to family members, so they know what the next step is.
Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah.
you know, I've got to consider maybe I should just give the will to my daughter, because she's the executor.
Is she an American citizen as well? She has
She's
dual-
not an
She's
American.
a Canadian.
Oh, she wouldn't be appointed by herself.
You'd have to get somebody who's,
Who's
a-
American.
yeah,
That
who's a US
is
citizen.
Very, that is a very valuable piece of
Yes.
information.
Yes, a citizen.
But you
have
don't
the
give up
person
your
who's not.
American citizenship if you also have, you can have dual citizenship.
In her case, she had to renounce her American citizenship.
Really?
Yeah.
If she can't be appointed by herself, then you need a New York agent.
Spouse with a green card.
Yes, as long as she lives in New York.
There you go.
Thank you.
So the co-executor has to live in New York? Yeah, well, in that case, you know, we have an attorney that I think.
Yeah, yeah.
The attorney didn't tell you that? Who wrote your will?
Well, this was years ago.
Did he ask you?
No, the attorney was not the attorney. The attorney I'm thinking of is a friend who referred us to the state Preston Estates and her.
okay,
Wait.
we can take this offline.
Yeah, okay, right, okay.
Thank you.
Handles
Yes, that's her
Thank you,
department.
Shelley.
You do? Do you have a card? Because we can.
No.
But this is very useful. This, this police department is-
And then we can write the.
Which
form.
type of
Wish Fish, oh, so what are you in?
Thank you.
Sure, you
You're the
welcome.
president of
Thank you
Wish
very
Fish.
much.
I would
Thank you.
love to do.
Okay.
Okay, that was really good.
That was great.
You have a lot to live up to. If you.
I've been there from the beginning. It's like 20.
You know about all those.
Yeah, right, one of your wonderful guests.
We have to talk about it. Okay, good, good.
So,
Great.
All right. All right, so now I'm gonna go home to my daughter, she's gonna make supper for me. Oh, thank you.
but tell her that she needs someone from the States to.
I have my
And
computer.
I did not know that.
So this was worth it.
It was worth it, and I hope I haven't taken up too damn much time.
Why don't you sit down, set up.
Having a real life situation. Well, I have a cousin who lives alone, I'm the executor for her will, so I ran now I need to get a copy of it, I'm gonna see her tomorrow. I'm Eli.
So,
People were shocked about what they need to do for preparation, so they don't have complications.
Was it discovered,
You know,
stuff?
all of her family.
You get to a certain age.
No, he didn't tell me, but he's a friend.
Yeah.
Oh,
this is sentencing. Changes in sentencing laws.
Got a video.
Oh, that's,
You want to send me this? Okay, oh, yeah.
Whatever.
Sure, and I just need to get, internet.
You want it to go.
Here, you don't want to.
No, go, okay, it's cool.
That's when my mother.
Taking
I
the
said,
name,
"You know, if you
parts
want
of
that, I said, no, this family is there." Okay. That was Louisa. And then.
Yeah.
Who to call, you know, what agencies to call. Index.
We're getting,
Yes,
you said only one phone number.
That was easy to catch. And so over the next month or so.
And then I go back.
Parallel. Instead of, what am I gonna do that, what about that? School.
The DAs didn't find the side. I heard, that's what Melissa told me, you guys saw it, yeah. You saw it.
That's basically her DA.
She didn't overplay her hand.
She not only didn't overplay her hand, but she acknowledged the
they
DAs
were
were not giving over discovery
My
before
daughter
the
has some others.
I mean, unbelievable. And
And then
so
she threw it eventually. And
she said she was supervisor or something, I don't know, her shop, because she's really fair, wasn't she fair? They did some really good people in the but I still thought, but they still have that. Of course they should.
They should have had, because it's such a technical, there's been so much misinformation.
from anywhere or anywhere.
I don't
be better.
I don't know. Not giving over and then going through such legal hope to even try to get it. Right. And now I think the government is really giving in to them. And
We've been able to push back. Oh, so I just registered.
I have only one.
We're not quite.
Right.
Our track is a pretty functional structure.
Well, they do that, well, now I in this
But I think I got an email from you guys with a link as well.
I was really involved in, so I was a judge in Superior Court in and domestic violence. They were against custody, they were against. I mean, and they were so in their I mean, you have to, it's always an antagonist, inherently antagonistic.
I've done that with my daughter.
Wait, no, this says registered to join though, so.
But the child did not.
Okay, this is what
Spend on anything and everything that had to be done. And they couldn't get access. And they had a.
You can't see things as good in the.
3/4 of the year, you get access to it now.
In jail. That's not how.
Can I share my screen?
That are going on in the world today, we can say it. Yes.
Okay, let me try.
But they don't want the public to have.
I guess money really is.
Yeah, but I think that's their right, but they're not supposed to do that. It only makes me-
I don't know. You want to be buried? Well, you don't have a clause.
I totally.
You don't have like authorized to do it. They say,
Okay.
you'll take care of it. It's like they won't let me.
I think we're about to start.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure it plays the audio from the video. I can test it. Okay.
Sorry.
How we going?
Yeah, we go. Say way.
Don't get anything, it's okay.
I think I can say muted. It looks like.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll
Ken,
wait.
this is my statement.
Okay.
It's worth, I don't know, if you put it on. I don't know, you say
You already read it into the record.
All right. fine.
Right.
Well, many thanks. This
Oh,
doesn't
thank you.
solve
This
our
is a
problem,
great-
but very useful.
Great
Very
agenda.
useful. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's terrific. We have two terrific topics, and are very different, and who would think that the first one is gonna be so animated. But now we're gonna talk about the changes in the law that led to mass incarceration, and how do we deal with it? So we have here with us a gentleman who we're gonna invite for another topic, but Eli Northrop, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Judith Clark. And they're going to help us get through this topic because it's going to be around for a long time. And the jails, if you think that there's a problem getting an apartment unsealed.
Prisons are hard to get out of, it's true, or get into.
Okay, so how do we start?
Who's gonna
Who is going to
introduce
start,
ourselves?
Eli or?
But yeah, I'm Eli Northrop. I'm a public defender. I work at the Bronx Defenders. I've done criminal defense work for over a decade. So I represent people in criminal court, people charged with everything from trespassing to homicide. And I do a lot of policy work as well. I'm the policy director for the criminal practice there. So a lot of my time now is spent in Albany, trying to advocate for changes in the criminal legal system to make them more fair. I actually had reached out originally to the community board to talk about discovery, which I understand you guys did talk about maybe a few weeks ago. That's been a big topic for the budget this year. And but one of the efforts that I've been invested in and I've worked with Judy on for a number of years is sentencing reform. In New York, we both are on the Communities Not Cages Coalition. And so that's the topic of this discussion.
Hi, I'm Judy Clark. I'm the director of a small project called the Survivors Justice Project. We were to implement and also track the utilization of the law that was passed about 6 years ago called the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, which allows people who are facing sentencing or were sentenced before the law was passed to go back into court and get reduced sentences if they can show a significant relationship between their experience of domestic violence and the offense that they're convicted of. I myself was incarcerated for a long time, and so I come by these issues from a lot of my own personal experience, and this is some of the most, and I watched the prison I was in, which was Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in Westchester. My mother used to say I'm in a very fancy neighborhood. Go from being 350 people to being 750 people. I went from seeing, I watched the ballooning of mass incarceration, and I left a lot of people behind. So these are very personal issues for me.
Yeah, and so we have a video that it's about 5 minutes, and then maybe we'll talk through the 3 bills that are part of the package for about 10 minutes, and then we're happy to take any questions about them. That sounds good.
Sounds good.
I have this memory of me as a child, somewhere around 4 or 5 years old, and going to school and mentioning to my classmates that I had visited my dad in jail. My father was a young dad to 2 children under 3 years old. He was sentenced 7.5 to 15 years, but that was a norm in the community that I was living in. Black and brown people in these communities get arrested more often. They have.
Should I I'll move it over.
It's, we're just trying to get rid of the feedback sound. It's just because they're very close.
Can you make it a little louder?
Yes.
Increase the volume.
We should be getting.
I think it's from there that you have to increase that volume, maybe. What?
No, my TV.
And we can do this part over. Yeah, we can go back.
Racist in nature. Because of mandatory minimums and prior convictions. Since Jim Crow days, black and brown people have been targeted for
Can we do it?
Can we use your sound and take this sound off?
Well,
It
then,
sounded like that was louder.
the people online might not be able to.
Yeah, we have.
Oh,
the
right,
issue of the
got it,
picture.
got it.
Are they not able to hear?
As long as you are near these owls, they can.
Oh, okay.
But it's like, I think the owls are talking.
Yeah, it's feeding back. The microphone from the owls.
On the YouTube video, just press the letter C and then caption right up and appear.
Yeah, so in the bottom right,
Bottom right, the letter,
the two C's next to each other, next to the, yeah, that way we can at
least read it. And
Yeah.
hear.
That's a good idea. And then you just have to.
Can we go back?
You know,
Yes.
either just play without audio.
It's a lot different without the audio, but I don't know, do we feel like there's a way to?
With the caption on, I think just pressing play from a distance, we can lightly hear it and
Okay.
read it. I think that would work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try it again.
We'll go half.
Yeah. we can-
Thank you. We just can't have it here. So.
15 years, but that was a norm in the community that I was living in. Black and brown people in these communities get arrested more often. They have more convictions than handcuffs.
That's good.
Yeah.
Prison due to the sentencing laws in New York State was like 2 weeks after I turned 17. I didn't even enjoy the process of being 17. At the age of 20, although I never spent any time in prison, I was staring at the possibility sentencing laws are fundamentally racist in nature, and black and brown people get longer and harsher sentences because of mandatory minimums and prior convictions. Since Jim Crow days, black and brown people have been targeted for mass incarceration, but it's only within the last 50 years that the sentencing structures have created this price of mass incarceration that we're living today. My father's long sentence was a result of the over punitive Rockefeller drug laws. What could have been a shorter sentence of anywhere from 1 to 3 years, followed a decade. The Rockefeller drug laws are created to be partial drugs, but what they did was left remnants of strike laws and mandatory minimums for students. A mandatory minimum is a sentence that the judge is required to impose under with mitigating circumstances. The judge may want to impose a lesser sentence, but can't do so. When I entered the system, the minimum sentence was 15 years to life. The judge thought that was too much. He wanted me to plead guilty to reduced charge, but he needed a prosecution to agree with it. And they refused. Prosecutors dangle these heavy sentences over your head and expect you to play along and take a plea bargain. If you have a prior conviction, you face New York State's 2 to 3 strike laws, which means that you face even harsher mandatory minimums that you would have before. You could have time to much power. Term sentences, take all kind of whole power. And yet the attitude in the public is shifted. The public is aware of the damage that mass incarceration has caused, but our sentencing scheme still reflects what their policies in the 1990s. Communities in the fear that the law over the past 50 years, New York State has been building a system of mass incarceration that has been disproportionately back to black and brown people.
Now, dismantle the system. It's like cages as a statewide campaign building of people and families who will be impacted by mass incarceration. All new racism and sensibilities. We are fighting to eliminate mandatory minimums so that prosecutors will have the ability to reverse plea deals. We're also fighting for a second look. Second look legislation is Floyd who served a certain amount of time in prison, no matter what their sentence might be, to the petition of the judge for resentence. It's time for judges to be able to go back into these sentences, take a second look at what a person's conviction was, and find out if they're still in alignment with the sensibilities of society out there. A person that went in at 21 and comes out at 45 is not the same person. They have learned, they've evolved, they've grown, and instead of just subject to punishment, their time should be time, merit time, are things that a person earns rather than what they change for their lives. People that are being out
my father's incarceration robbed my sister and I. The father and daughter relationship that we preserved. And it took over a decade to reestablish that relationship after his
It's a mistake. We don't have to lock everybody up in a cage. But the communities that cages can't take us. Incarcerated by ending these draconian sentencing laws and invest in community-based programs that actually bring safety to our communities. Nothing has ever changed. No legislation, no oppression, nothing has ever changed until the voices of our people. So get back to say, we're not going to take it.
All right, thank you, and sorry about the technical issues. I think it feels important to show that video because some of the voices that are heard on there are members of our coalition, and Marvin Mayfield, who does most of the talking on that video, explaining about the mandatory minimums. He passed away a couple years ago, but one of the acts is actually named after him. He was a very powerful advocate. But what the video also does is set up kind of like the history of how we got here in New York State. You know, these aren't inevitable decisions that we have these long sentences. They're a product of policy decisions that were really made 50 years ago. The harsh mandatory minimum sentences, a lot of it came from the 90s when the federal government started to give states money for truth in sentencing. And basically states got millions and millions of dollars if they agreed to ensure that sentences, people served like over 90% of the sentence they were given. That meant that they took away programming and the ability to earn time off the sentencing. We don't get that money from the federal government anymore. States don't get it, but New York hasn't gone back and changed the laws to reflect that. So, you know, we've got these mandatory minimums, these 2 and 3 strikes laws, and a reduction in programming and earned time that are just a vestige of a different era. And you can see the results. I mean, there's huge racial disparities, both in like the criminal legal system, but specifically in sentencing as well. People who are Black and brown get higher sentences. And the mass majority of our prison system, 75% of the people incarcerated are Black or brown. That does not reflect the racial makeup of our state. 98% of convictions come through pleas, and mandatory minimums have a large hand in that statistic as well.
Why don't you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, we'll get that when we talk about the Marvin Mayfield Act. We'll talk about that specifically, yeah, because it's not necessarily intuitive. So there's 3 bills that are part of this package, and I don't know if you are able to see. I think you might have had that in the, yeah. But the Second Look Act is the first. So the Second Look Act is a bill that's sponsored by Senator Salazar in the Senate and Assemblymember Walker in the Assembly. This is a bill that would provide incarcerated people to have their sentence reconsidered after a certain amount of time. People who are serving long sentences of 20 years or more, they would be able to apply at the 10-year mark to have a judge look at their record and just reconsider whether or not they still should be sentenced to the same thing that they were originally sentenced to. You know, we think about sentencing very differently than we did a long time ago. So we have a lot of people serving these huge sentences that if they were in court today, they would never have gotten that sentence. I've even seen in the 10 years that I've been practicing in the Bronx, attitude shift. People who got long sentences for drug crimes in 2015 when I started now get treatment programs. But you know, those individuals don't have the ability to be sentenced today. So that's what it does. It doesn't require a judge to change their decision. It just gives the judge an opportunity to do that. And it's actually something that's been supported by the Chief Judge of New York, Judge Rowan Wilson. He used his entire State of the Judiciary speech this year to support the Second Look Act. And Judy, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of understand it, part of what it tries to address is that when someone goes to trial or doesn't go to trial because they don't know enough to realize that they're being bullied into taking pleas, but they're at their worst moments. They have either done something terrible has probably been done to them in that situation as well. They are overwhelmingly young. They are not schooled in the system they're in, and the only thing they know is sort of to harden their hearts, harden their resolve, and just sort of walk into that courtroom. And if you have a serious case, that courtroom also may be affected by the fact that there's been horrible media about you, which has, you know, which everyone says juries don't see, but everyone knows that everyone's, the judge has seen it, everyone has seen it. And so people are at their worst in that moment as well. And especially when they're young, when the only thing you know how to do is to be tough, to try to address your own fear in that situation. And oftentimes people's offenses, and including my own, are terrible. You know, people under various conditions can do terrible things, but they're more complicated than that. And in the heat of that moment, and especially if there's public outcry, then people get the highest possible sentences. You look at that same person later on, and you see something very different. So the work that I do as in domestic violence, you know, people, a lot of the people, women are serving 25 to life. Sometimes for killing their abuser, sometimes for having their abuser be their co-defendant and getting them involved in a robbery where someone else is killed. And the case gets looked at in that kind of way. And then now they're going back into court, and the same judge is looking at it and say, you know, I never thought about all these other factors. So that's really what Second Look is allowing the courts to do, is to say, in the calm of a period, and also in 10 years, that 18-year-old rebellious youngster is now in college and doing something very different with themselves. So should they really do 15 more years? Whose interest does that serve?
Yeah. You know, it's a national movement. Other states have passed Second Look bills. Washington, D.C. recently did it. There's one in Congress that's pending. We've got a number of federal judges who have asked for this, as well as the chief judge. So there's a support from a broad spectrum of people. And again, it doesn't require resentencing. It just gives people a chance to go in front of a judge. So the second bill that's part of this package is called the Earned Time Act. This would strengthen and expand good time and merit time, which is time that people can earn off of their sentence while incarcerated. So either through good behavior or through participation in programming. This is a place that New York is way behind the rest of the country. New York, most people can only earn 1/7 of their time off. States like Oklahoma and Alabama, you can earn over 50%. So it's really a place that New York is woefully behind. Most people everybody can earn good time in New York system. That's good behavior. But merit time right now is only limited to people who have nonviolent offenses. So a lot of people, the vast majority of people, actually can't even earn time for participating in programming.
And also, actually, in New York, many people have a minimum sentence and then life at the end.
Right.
And in that situation, there is no good time.
Right. And so this is something actually that even corrections officers are asking for, the expansion of good time and merit time, because it incentivizes people to engage in good behavior and to engage in programming. So it's again, another bill that has support from different places. It's another place where New York is way behind the rest of the country. It's a common sense proposal. Now in our bill, good time would increase to 50%, up to 50% that you could earn, and merit time up to 25% that you could earn. And
So together,
so together it would be 75% if you participated and got every single thing that you could. Again, like Oklahoma and Alabama, it's 60%. So that would make New York a leader. But even if it doesn't end up being those exact numbers, the expansion of good time and merit time, it's sorely needed. And again, this is just a thing that New York hasn't gone back and revisited.
Is there a capacity for the additional, I assume there'll be people who want to go into additional programming. So does the bill ask for additional funding for the?
Yes. And a lot of the funding would be saved by the fewer people that were incarcerated. So just shifting funding. And we do have a staffing crisis with COs right now. It's well documented. To the extent that
Not because there's not enough COs, but because a third of these COs are out of work at any one time because of the abuse of sick time. Sick time. Just be clear.
To the extent that, but the governor is even acknowledging and looking for solutions and proposed a maritime expansion in her budget. And she has not been at the forefront of progressive change for criminal legal system. So if she's already supporting that, it's a real issue that needs to be addressed.
And in terms of what you were saying, one of the things that the bill does is it says, there are prisons, the prison I was in is rich with programming. And when public funding for college was shut down, we built a college program on our own that drew on, the resources in that community. Sing Sing, many of you have probably seen that movie, but you go upstate to Attica, to Elmira, to the places where the youngsters are, there are no programs. What this bill will do is it says, if the facility that you're in does not offer programming, you automatically get the good time, whether you do it or not, because you haven't been given the opportunity, because it's trying to pressure the system into saying, let's provide it. Then you're giving people choices, and there'll be people who are knuckleheads and won't take them. Well, so there'll be people who will take 10 years for them to wake up, but it's always there. So it really tries to put those funds into exactly what you were saying.
Right, and incentivizing behavior with a carrot rather than just a stick, right? Right now the strategy's been put somebody in solitary confinement if they don't have good behavior, but studies show time and time again that in fact the safer prisons are the ones with the most programming, where people feel like a part of something. And the vast majority of people are coming back into the community. Most people are not going to spend the rest of their life in prison. We as a state should be invested in setting people up for success afterwards, not depriving them of opportunities.
And is this for nonviolent and?
Yes.
This is for nonviolent only, or it's expanding it?
No, it's expanding it. And I think that's really important. And thank you for asking that. First, in the system right now, everybody's eligible for good time. So even people with the most serious offenses can earn good time. It kind of doesn't make sense that we would deprive people with the ability to earn merit time based on their offense. And violent offenses, and I'll talk about this in a second, but having practiced, things are deemed violent offenses that nobody would consider violent in the everyday use of that term. A burglary in the second degree is going into an apartment building and taking a package. That's a C violent felony with a 3.5-year mandatory minimum. So we feel that it's very important to give anybody who's serving time, no matter what the offense, the ability to earn. And if they don't participate in it, they're not going to earn it.
And actually, as someone who spent my time there and was there for a violent offense, the people who actually are the mentors, the leaders, the elders, the people that work with the youngsters coming in they're all there doing long time, because at a certain point in our lives, we did something that was harmful and was violence. And so And often, oftentimes when people are young. And so that distinction of violent and nonviolent becomes more about a single act than the person. And we're really part of what we're trying to do is say sentencing should be about the person and include in it the idea that people change. And so the very people that they rely on to deal with violence inside, to deal with all the issues that are the problems, are the very people who at this point, we do it anyway because we care about our communities inside and outside, but there are the very people that aren't able to have any impact on our sentencing for that.
You give a context, what were your years? Were you in the 90s?
I went in the 80s and I came
The
out
80s.
in 2019. I did 37 years, so.
Thank you.
So the final bill that's part of the package is called the Marvin Mayfield Act. That's named after Marvin, who you all saw in the video. This gets rid of mandatory minimums. So it eliminates mandatory minimum sentences in New York. This was talked about in the video, but mandatory minimums are mandatory minimum sentences give prosecutors really outsized control in the criminal legal system, because by virtue of a charging decision, the prosecutor dictates what the minimum sentence can be. A judge, even if a judge doesn't agree, if there is a conviction on a charge that it carries a mandatory minimum, a person has to do that mandatory minimum. So in New York, we have mandatory minimums for violent offenses, although some of them, like, even though it seems it's a violent offense, it doesn't really feel violent. And so that really affects the way that things play out in the legal system. And this happens, I see this all the time, especially with people who deal with mental health or drug addiction, charged with something like burglary, like going into the basement of an apartment building and taking tools from the super or something. On video, it's not really something that is contestable as a matter of a trial, but the behavior itself, there's nobody there, it's not violent, but a prosecutor can hang 3.5, 5 years over their head and say, look, I'm going to offer you 2 years. If we go to trial, you're getting 5 years. People take that all the time. People take those deals. And it kind of entirely changes the dynamics, because a judge could sit there and say, well, I really don't think this is fair. I'd love to give this person treatment. I'd love to give this person a different opportunity, but they don't have the power when a mandatory minimum exists and the legislature has said this is it. So what the Marvin Mayfield Act would do is it just gets rid of those mandatory minimums. It doesn't say that a judge doesn't change the range of a sentence that a judge could impose. It just allows for flexibility. So if you plead guilty to something that you did, a judge can say, understand that this is what you did. I'm taking into the count the full picture of who you are, and I'm going to sentence you to what I think is appropriate. And again, we've had a number of former and current judges come out in favor of this, because they have said that it ties their hands and they've had to impose sentences that are really harsh. I had a client who was in a treatment program. This was during COVID. He was doing really well, but he suffered from schizophrenia, and he had drug addiction issues for many years. And this individual was working for Amazon. He was doing great. COVID hit. He lost access to his pharmacy and couldn't get his medication, and he relapsed. He did exactly he went into 3 separate apartment buildings and took stuff from the basement, never saw an individual. He called me, he turned himself in, we turned him in. And he said, I can't believe I did this. I was doing so well. I lost my way. Because he had a prior record, he was facing 5 years mandatory minimum on each of those burglaries. 5 mandatory, and it's consecutive because they were 3 separate events. And the DA offered him 8 years, and he took it. And he's incarcerated upstate, and we're paying over $1 million for the burglary of under $1,000 worth of tools and items. And there was nothing any of us could do. If that prosecutor thought they were being lenient, because they could have gone 15 years as a minimum. So this is the kind of injustice, and this is the kind of thing that kills me when I see it as a practicing, because I think if people sat in court and watched that, if everybody could take their time and sit in court, we wouldn't stand for that as a society, if this is the way that things operate. So again, a judge can impose whatever sentence they think is appropriate. This doesn't require a lower sentence to be imposed. It just gives more flexibility.
I have a lot of thoughts, so I'll just start with some of them here. I mentioned earlier, the first part of our agenda tonight, so the courts being overwhelmed. My understanding is that oftentimes plea deals are brought about in an effort to try and move through the legal system quicker because there aren't enough judges and folks to kind of make that happen. So can you speak more to that? Because, if we're hearing from so many segments of our community that our courts are overwhelmed, we need to do more to support them, introducing legislation on the other side, which we may be in support of, feels like it's going to put pressure on it in the opposite direction.
Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
Well, two things I want to say to that, and one is our courts are overwhelmed because we overuse the courts for every issue in the world. So you don't want to deal with the problem of overwhelmed courts by decreasing access to justice. You want to figure out what should courts be used for and what else should we be doing. So that's just one, and I think we don't even think of that here because we're so used to basically having that kind of situation where the idea that the right to a trial should disintegrate, which it has. 98% of the people had no right to trial because they were told by their attorney, if you don't take this, you're going to spend a lot more time in prison. And that's the answer we have to what you're saying, which is true, that it's an overwhelmed system. The other thing I will say is that the chief judge was explicit in saying that second look, for instance, was perfectly that the courts could take that on, and that in the long run, because all of this is also trying to create a situation where our bloated system, which costs millions. So if you had a court system that allowed for all of these other alternative ways to deal with that client who was schizophrenic, that client who was had DV, that all these other people who actually there's underlying issues which we don't have the resources to deal with because it's all going into the prison system. It's sort of trying to unwind that. And the Chief Justice is saying we have the resources for that, and that's where the resources go.
And I also think like the big problem with some of this is the pleas are coerced. If you had a system that didn't have mandatory minimums, I can tell you cases drag on because a prosecutor's unwilling to go down and maybe a person doesn't want it, and then a case drags on while they fight back and forth. If a judge could just say, I think this is the appropriate sentence from day, 1 month in, you could actually have cases resolved much more quickly. If a judge had that ability to do it, the parties could come to an agreement that's fair earlier, if that was the way a case was going to go.
I just think like sometimes that is coming even from like district attorneys and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
They're up for an election or something like that, and they make sure that they look, they have this big marquee case and they got to make sure that they're minimum, right? So I think like the system is broken in so many different places, and I understand you're trying to fix one avenue of it. We're hearing as a community board other complaints in other areas, and so I'm just trying to kind of connect all the pieces and make sure, my capacity, I just want to speak for everyone else.
No, absolutely. Other questions?
Yeah, so is wrongful conviction, is that what does he mean by that? Is that somebody takes a plea, but because they don't want to risk going to trial?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That happens like another enormously, especially when people are facing really high sentences. So the pleas are so, the thing that's hanging over their head is they just say, look, I'm just going to take it. I've already been in Rikers for 2 years. I know I didn't do this, but they're saying I'll get out tomorrow. And so,
Or they plead to something that they didn't do. They may have done something else, something lesser, but they're now pleading to something more just to resolve the case.
What was the theory originally? Behind mandatory?
Yeah.
I mean,
the
really
theory
it's
in
not working, but what was the theory in it?
Yeah.
To try to say that there should be like it shouldn't, it was sort of saying, as long as it's discretionary, then there's going to be disparities in how justice happens, as though there's not already disparities based in who has access to lawyers, who has access to money. But it's sort of saying if it's mandatory, but what's interesting in it is that what it really did is it sort of said, we don't want to judge, this judge to feel one way and that judge to feel the other. But what it ultimately did is it said, we're going to give the power to the DA.
Right.
And it's not really the DA's job to have that power. It's really the judge's job to be able to assess in a
And in
different way.
fairness, there were judges who wanted everyone to go free. Okay, no matter what, they as little as possible. So.
But then there were
they
other
said,
judges
as
who wanted to go.
Maxim, they said, okay. People said, how can you let this person go? Look what they did. So there's a minimum. That was understandable at a time. But when I've lived through it, family member and other people spend 3 days a month in court with observing different cases, and it's rarely appropriate. Recently, there was someone who I initially thought should get a lot of time, and then I got to know the person. They were getting rehab. They were ready to be a mental health counselor after 2 years, and then given 2.5 years sentence to go into a prison where all of that they've accomplished may get lost or damaged, and it didn't make sense, but they had to stay.
And the racial disparities that mandatory minimums were also met, they also said, okay, this is going to decrease racial disparities if we have mandatory. In fact, the racial disparities have increased since mandatory minimums.
Right.
Just to give you one last, and I know I want to, but I had a friend inside who was a drug addict. She lived upstate, and she had multiple cases of purse snatching, which is how she fed her addiction. And it was a small town. She was Black, and they were mad that she was doing purse snatching in that town. So mandatory minimums includes the issue of repetitive cases. She was doing 15 to life for purse snatching. So, I mean, that's an extreme case, but you saw it happen over and over and over again, especially to women. So you had your hand, and both of you had your hands, yes. Yes.
Oh,
Go ahead.
No, I mean, after me.
Yes.
Will has his hand up.
Yes.
So thank you. This is a great presentation, and I've learned about things similar. And I'm glad you're here because I've always had this question. So my question is in twofold. So I understand, and thank you, Shelley, for elaborating the reason for the minimum. It's like a standardization, which we all know when you make a standard for someone, it's for all people, it's for no one, right? It's terrible. So I agree that these plea deals are terrible. I know family members who have to deal with this as well. But what's the con to this? And I think the con we kind of like alluded to, that there's this inconsistency of ruling depending on where you are, who the judges are, whether they hit their toe this morning or they got a hug before walking into work. So there's going to be this inconsistency. Hopefully it goes in a positive light. So what data is available where this is successful, or what have we seen, whether it's in the States, across the pond? I just want to know a little bit more of like what we've seen as far as judges' actions, and whether a community, say in London, North London, is different than South London or Maryland or whatever it may be. So it's just, is there any data support for us to see?
We can follow up and send you a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of resources on the website, Communities Not Cages NY, and if you go resources. I will say that that discrepancy is a feature of the criminal legal system. I mean, judges make totally different rulings on suppression issues, on bail, on discovery. It's something that it's just the case. You might have one jury, you might have one juror on your jury who thinks a certain way. So we do have those things built into the way the system exists. And
which is why you should know the judges that you get a chance to vote for.
Right.
It really, most people don't even do those votes.
And the process.
They are really, really important because someone's life will depend on whether or not they are reasoned in their decisions.
But I think that like the take is that this experiment in mandatory minimums has really it has not accomplished its goal of decreasing racial disparities or harmony across sentencing. All that it has done is just given outsized power to prosecutors in a system that, and I urge all of you, if you want to, I'll take you to court anytime you want to come watch arraignments or anything. This is not a system that's even at all. It's a system where all the power is already stacked against the accused. And this is just another tool that's really makes it
Well,
more.
just to follow up on Will's question, are there any states that have gotten rid of mandatory minimums, and what's the experience?
Yes, for different types of offenses. This would go farther than most states because it gets rid of mandatory minimums for everything, but there are states that have gotten rid of mandatory minimums for certain offenses, and the sentences have gone down, but it has not led to an increase in crime. And that's the thing we see over and over again, that long sentences have no direct correlation with decreases in public safety. It just doesn't. And that's another thing that we thought, and you can even see it because we think about certain, like we used to sentence people for drug crimes at these really, really high rates. New York got rid of the drug sentencing, and there's not an increase in crime because of that as a correlation. So, but I'll follow up with those with the states.
We can,
And,
there's a member of
yeah.
the public who's been
Oh,
dying to
yeah.
speak this before. Would you like to introduce yourself and talk for a minute?
My name is Jonathan Blank. I live on Riverside Drive. With all due respect, I'm going to take a very different position. If you look at a Roadrunner cartoon or a Looney Tunes cartoon, the protagonist runs off a cliff, looks down, realizes he's about to fall, tries to turn around and scramble back to safety. That's what's happened in Seattle. That's what's happened in Portland. That's what's happened in San Francisco. That's what's happened in Los Angeles. These bills do not exist in isolation. They're part of an attack on the judiciary. They're part of an attack on the justice system. They're part of an attack on the police. And it's been quite successful in the New York State legislature with the so-called Bail Reform Act. I urge you not to support this in isolation. There may be elements of this that are in fact meritorious. The Second Look Act, I think, is probably pretty hard to argue with, but it doesn't exist by itself. This is part of an agenda to basically empty the jails and put everybody on Broadway. And I think it puts all of us at risk.
Thank you.
Mr. Blank, may I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm Jami Floyd. So as I see this, it returns, and let me preface this by saying that I practiced criminal law for 10 years, and then I taught law, and then I was a journalist and continue to be a journalist of crimes. And I should also hasten to add, I worked on 3 strikes in interest of full disclosure, 3 strikes in the Clinton White House, but I fought against it. So as I see this, it restores to judges and the judiciary the discretion that has been removed from them and handed to district attorneys and prosecutors, many of whom I have great respect for. Alvin Bragg is a friend, and I admire him, and I think he's trying to do restorative things in the role that he's in. But this seems to recalibrate for the system to some extent the role of the judiciary that's been removed by 3 strikes and mandatory minimums and some of the last 20 to 30 years of sort of politicized legislation. What's your thought on that?
If you look back to what was talked about 30 and 40, I'm older than 30 years ago. The talk all that time was always about, you have crazy judges who let everybody out and crazy judges who put everybody in for
right.
Restoring discretion to judges will still leave you with charges of racism, which I think are more, not always well-founded, with allegations of prejudice and with discrepancies. You're not going to get rid of the discrepancies. I think probably that's the one thing we can agree on. There are going to be discrepancies. One of the great studies was done of the court system in Israel, where they found that your chances of being sentenced to jail depended upon what hour in the day you came up for sentencing. That if you came up at 11:30 to 12, right before lunch, your chances were 4 times higher of getting
I believe it.
so discretion among judges might solve one problem, but it just turns to another. But my point remains that I think this, and especially this miserable video that we saw, are part of an attack on public safety. And it's not all alone. It's not just these bills. It's part of the whole ball of wax. And I think it puts us at risk.
Well, thank you, Mr. Blank, for
I know,
coming.
but let me just, you want to say something?
Well, I
Then
was
you
just
want
gonna
to
say,
question.
I'm gonna give you my card too, because I would love for you to come, and I will
I
take
spend a
you.
lot of time with it.
Okay.
I practice law. I didn't practice criminal law, but I practice law.
Well, that's a little bit different. I mean, if you spend some, I'm inviting you to do it because I think that miserable video is actually about the humanity of a lot of people, that it's easy to miss, but it actually exists. And if you're open to it, come watch
you
arraignments.
said, in that video, it said, and this, we won't, it said, a crime is a mistake. Well, I don't believe that. I believe crime is a crime. And, you know, people can regret, people can say, I wish I could do it over again, or whatever. But if I were a judge, the one thing that I don't think would affect me at all was whether the person had remorse or not. I don't think, they have remorse for getting caught. They never have remorse for actually what they did. And so, yeah, I'd be happy to go to court with you, but I don't think I would, I don't think 81 years old would change.
Well, I'll say this, if Mr. Blank will go to court with you, Eli, I'm coming. I was going to, and I think we've kind of addressed it, but I was gonna speak to Will's point that I think, I do think these are very, very hard issues. We had a different, as you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, a different session in a different committee about the discovery reform package. I, as a former public defender, and I know Robin and David, they're among my closest friends, I think that someone can make a mistake, but also commit a crime. And that is the tension in our community board. I'm not really interested right now in the federal government or even larger New York City, but that is the tension. You know, people don't feel safe, but we also have to worry about dignity and decency and humanity and doing the right thing by these people that were in your, I thought, quite beautiful video presentation. But they're very, very hard issues. And I believe that our system is one that has been broken from the start, but it's the best system that we've got. And it imagines adversaries and a judge, not an all-powerful prosecutor, a defenseless, indigent, sometimes pro se person, or overworked, under-resourced public defender, and an all-powerful prosecutor. I think I already said that. So I think the judge is critically important. And yes, they are only human, and sometimes they throw away the key, or sometimes they let them loose. But that is the system I believe in, and I would like to restore discretion to the judiciary to the extent we've removed it over the last 30 years. And so I just wanted to make that statement. I do wonder why it said HHS, but since it is, I came, so thank you,
Nobody else-
thank you for having us.
Nobody else would take it.
Well, thank you.
Um,
All right.
So, yeah, in terms of legislation, where is this legislation?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, so all three bills have been in the, I think this is the fourth legislative session that they enjoy broad co-sponsorship. The Earned Time Act just made it through the Corrections Committee, I think 2 weeks ago. The Second Look Act also passed through that committee. If it were to be brought to the floor, there's enough co-sponsors that it would pass. So this is something that we've been building support. I mean, we go to Albany frequently. We've got an advocacy day on May 13th. The last time I think we had 400 people up there. So these are bills that it's not like this is the first legislative session. They've been well considered, they've been crafted, they've been debated, they've been talked about. So, yeah, sorry.
What is the likelihood that one or two might get passed and not the third, whatever the?
Yeah.
Very likely.
Very likely that, well, I mean, we're fighting to have them, but we're not saying that as a coalition, we're not saying they all have to pass at once. And if, what we are asking for is, a resolution in support. If you all feel more comfortable with some of the bills, then that's also another thing. But I think really the Marvin Mayfield Act, the Eliminate Mandatory Minimums Act, is the one that is probably a little bit farther behind in terms of passing. The Second Look Act, as I said, the chief judge of the court system is in favor of it and has been advocating for it. The Earned Time Act, even the governor is in favor of increasing good time and merit time. So I would say, Jude, I don't know if you disagree.
No, I think that's the assessment I would say as well. And I just, because you've been having a hint of for so long.
Yeah, my point was that if the, first of all, the Second Look Act, which I think makes so much sense, okay, experientially, in addition to justice-wise, we should do something tonight about it, if we can, okay? If not, we also need to check with our electorates. Now,
I can tell you that Assemblymember Rosenthal is a sponsor and Senator Holman Siegel is a sponsor. Both of them are sponsors of all three bills.
Okay.
Assemblymember Lasher is not, although he committed to doing it.
When he was running.
And what?
He committed while he was running.
When he was running. I lived in the Morningside Gardens and we had a candidates forum and so of course I asked him and he said, oh yes, I have no problem with that, but yes.
How about Cordell? What's her?
She's also.
And Cordell, she is Louisa, Cordell Clear.
And an advocate, a
A very
powerful
strong
advocate for it.
Yeah.
Michael, did you have a question?
Yeah, just, I think the member from the community, our community board is bringing up concerns and some of them echo my own where, we've seen, we talked about these being well-intentioned efforts 40, 50 years ago, and they turned into a disaster from the perspective of folks who are incarcerated, folks who are trying to help the situation. More recently, we've seen, someone mentioned it, the reform of bail law, which was brought about, I think, for the same reasons, to try and reduce the number of people that are in our prison system and justice systems. And I think the overwhelming impact of that seems to have been fairly negative. Maybe my perspective is wrong here, but it seems like colloquially, like the incidence of repeat crime or these smaller crimes, petty crimes, seem to be.
That's anecdotal.
That's anecdotal.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're not talking about bail reform.
I understand. I understand that we're not,
but
my point with it is, the reason that I'm bringing it up here is because, and again, we have a member who expressed a similar sentiment, is that, well, some things that are well-intentioned have the wrong or the opposite result. We've seen it in longer history, we've seen it potentially, anecdotally, however you want to frame it.
So what do you suggest?
So my question to you is, can you speak to why your efforts now are going to buck the trend?
Yeah.
One thing I just want to say about the question of intention, I think most of the time, if you look at, especially if you look at like the 90s and the tough on crime, I think that was not particularly based on well-intentioned ways of trying to reform the system. I think it was a political climate to try to sow fear and to do it in some pretty,
But we always look at.
you know,
No,
can I just,
no, you can't.
yes, please. And I think that, that it worked. And I think that it became, and I used to see that. I mean, we would have legislators come in actually inside, and they would say, I would like to be able to, you know, support this and this and this, but the climate out there is such that I will lose my seat if I do. And so one thing is that on the one hand, we, you know, the only way the system works is that we try to pressure our, you know, if you want my vote, you have to do this. But I think that oftentimes evidence is not, you know, things are not evidence-based. So actually the people that did research, for instance, on bail reform,
Right.
have a very different perspective than the headlines you read that shows fear. And it does show fear in me. I take the subway every day. But the actual evidence-based work that they did about it showed that it did not have the same impact of increasing crime, number one. And number two, that people didn't even understand that bail reform had very little to do with violent crime. And I know we don't want to get into the question of bail reform, but I think
I have no problem getting into it.
yeah, but I think that that one, none of what we're trying to argue for hasn't been tried in places, and we can see some of the effects. It is based on a perspective that says public safety, it's in the interest of public safety to have a rehabilitative model of prisons.
So can I just, as a follow-up to that, and it goes, you know, I think one of the things I'm having the hardest time digesting, I think most people here seem to agree, even the gentleman from the public who disagreed with seems like most things, even he was in support of the Second Look Act, which is great. But this one that's up on the board right now, particularly the second and third strikes, you know, from the perspective of someone who has had a crime committed against them, right? How do you speak to those folks where, you know, you're saying we had these things in place, we gave you a chance, you went through the system, you lessened your sentence, right, good behavior, and then you committed a crime again, and maybe that crime is violent, you know?
Yeah.
Can you speak to the frustrations that members of the public might feel when?
That's so important.
Yeah.
I think we're
Definitely. And I think these feel like big transformative things, and they're trying to fix an entrenched and large problem. But if you like zoom out on all of these, what it's doing, the Second Look Act, as I think we all understand, it just gives judges the opportunity to review, right? The Earn Time Act, it says more people are going to have the chance to earn more time by good behavior and program. So, but they have to do that. They have to earn it. And then the mandatory minimums eliminating any judge, it instructs them actually still to take into account a person's history when sentencing. So it doesn't say you disregard those other instances where you got a chance and you messed up, or somebody who's, you know, maybe shown, you know, hasn't had the ability to take advantage, or somebody who's, you know, addicted, or somebody who maybe the judge just looks at as a person who can't really be helped. The judge can take that into account and can issue the exact same sentence that they would have without the mandatory minimum. It tells judges, look at the person's history. So it doesn't prevent a judge from giving a higher sentence based on exactly what you said. And we know crime victims have the ability to speak at sentencing. They can talk about what happened to them and how they feel. It just doesn't require a certain sentence. So I don't think it's as necessarily like hugely transformative of the practice, but it just gives the ability to take into account somebody's humanity and all of it. Yeah.
So just the small examples, youngsters get arrested and they're terrified of being inside, and they take a plea really quickly. And no one says to them, be careful, because you're pleading you're pleading to an E felony. If you fought your case, or if you had parents that could get you out, you would be out on the street, and you'd never take that plea, because actually we could get it down to a misdemeanor. And so they have that plea, and maybe they've done that twice when they were. Now they're 35, and they get arrested for a felony. But they have mandatory minimums that are jacked up because of those, and it's not to say that they shouldn't be held accountable for whatever it is that they do at 35, but it's to say that it looks really different than what you're describing, which also happens. And you're right, if someone, you see, listen, we used to be inside and we used to see people who did money crimes and went through the system 3 times while we were sitting there. We were mad at them too. You get a chance and you're blowing it. We don't get a chance, so it is coming.
Well, I think also just the perspective of the people and the families who are impacted by those crimes.
Absolutely.
They don't get the second chance. Right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I think trying to weigh, and that's always at the heart of justice, right?
Yes.
Is, you go back thousands of years. So
it's really true.
On the one hand, you want to show empathy and belief in people and not just a moment, a mistake, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But there's also that.
Yeah.
So I think that's just part of what
totally true.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think what I've come to see in my practice and in my life is that we've set these goalposts, right? And the United States has set these goalposts way, way down in terms of sentencing compared to other countries. And, survivors and victims of crimes and their family oftentimes feel like the value to their loved one or the value to themselves is connected to how far down the goalposts the sentence is. When in fact, if we moved where those goalposts was, they would feel just as vindicated if it was the maximum at that goalpost. But it's just, it's just a metric that we've chosen. And so certainly all of these, the Second Look Act requires that, the victim be notified and have the opportunity to weigh in for the second look. And, people also, survivors change. And I think people sometimes want and have changed their relationship. And even now there's people that have asking for somebody to get paroled and they don't get paroled.
So you're saying the Second Look Act, when the resentencing is considered, the victims can speak.
There's a hearing, and there's a hearing that would happen, and the judge takes into account all of those, and the prosecutor is notified as part of it, and so
it's a big issue.
I also think that when the victim stands before the judge, and we'd have to do a massive survey, but I think when victims stand before the judge and they say what they're going to say, especially in violent crimes, and there's a mandatory minimum, what they're saying is almost hollow because the judge has who are they talking to?
Right.
The mandatory minimum is going to be assessed whether they say what they say or they don't show up at all. Right. If the judge really has to listen and take it to heart, then it has that much more value and meaning.
I think if we're talking about unintended consequences, I think most of them are on the side of what people were, I remember in the 70s when this came up, and people were starting to impose mandatory minimums. And there were people on the other side saying, this is going to be a disaster and it's going to remove discretion and it's going to result in prosecutors, having the upper hand, the leverage, and exactly what's happened. So, I'm sure there are a million unintended consequences sitting in Attica and Dannemora and other Bedford and other places. Those are the unintended consequences. I don't think any of us want to see.
Yes.
Go ahead. No, go first. Go ahead.
So I think you hinted at when you were saying before about the people like what Lasher had said he was going to support and you didn't. I have 2 questions about the sponsors. Are they across the aisle? Are they all Democrats? Are they Democrat, Republican? And then second is, what do you like? If someone's campaigning on reducing mandatory minimums is generally a losing issue. So how are you what do you do to educate the public about any of these? Because I think people generally, if you say you're tough on crime, it's very hard to lose by saying you're tough on crime.
Well, I will say the Republicans in the New York State legislature don't have much value because so there are not any Republicans, but in terms of getting bills passed, so
like the Democrats in the national.
But it is not just it is a swath of legislators from across the state. It's not just people from New York City. Anna Kellis sponsors the Earned Time Act. She's out of Ithaca. Assemblymember Meeks out of Rochester has the Eliminate Martin Mayfield Act. Senator Cooney out of Rochester has the Earned Time Act. And then it's Senator Salazar from the city. Latrice Walker is an assembly member from the city, and Zellner Myrie. He's running for mayor. And so, you know, he's got the Eliminate Mandatory Minimums Act. And, you know,
it's interesting though, and nationally around Second Look is being promoted by both Republicans and Democrats nationally. And Georgia, the Republican legislature just passed a Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, which is a second look around a specific set of issues. And it was overwhelmingly, I mean, it took them 1 year to do what it took us 10 years to do in a Democratic legislature. So sometimes, so it's, so in that sense, I think there's a larger way in which, you know, people are looking at what the hole we've dug and what do we need to do about it. And none of these things are easy, but I just wanted to say one other thing, which is the people that I would spend my time with inside, most of them were crime victims before they were crime perpetrators. Most of them did not get any justice as a crime victim. There's that idea of sort of there's two groups of people, and there's the victims and then there's the perpetrators. And I think that the reality is it's more complicated than that, which isn't to say, you know, I watched kids I knew, when I first went in, women were there, you know, who doing 15, 20, 25 to life for the mandatory drug crimes. Their children were raised in a horrendous foster care situation. And they ended up on the streets and in gangs. And they came in having done some horrible crimes, really horrible crimes. So, but they were complicated kids, and some of them really emerged in different ways when they were in different situations. So part of, I think, our problem, or part of when you say, you know, what do you do? How do you have these conversations? We don't have complicated conversations about this stuff, and we don't think about it in complicated ways. And the issues are complicated. The question of how people, you know, how to bring public safety. I promise you that a prison that has a college program is going to produce and has the opportunity for people to get out. You're going to have good citizens. You're going to have people that are at these kinds of boards coming out of that prison. But prisons that are where you're sitting warehoused with no hope, you don't want to see those people coming out.
So I just have, thank you. I'm gonna address the board members. I just had two thoughts. My computer keeps failing. I can't pull up I think this computer is actually dead. When looking at our agenda item, I noticed that we just have links to the actual bills.
Yeah.
And so we don't have a real resolution written out. Now, I'm someone who, I have a big heart. I believe in second chances, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Truly, I do. And so I like this a lot. But for my committee members, I feel like I would like to see a resolution written.
Yeah.
And before we vote on anything tonight.
Right.
Because I saw this.
Well, can you just say why? Because
I don't think it would pass
because
on
my
full board if we don't have anything written down. I've been here
well,
long enough to see it not go through, and the discussion that we're having now is going to repeat 2 weeks from now.
Right.
And so,
but we're not having a discussion based on the writing of the resolution. We're having a discussion based on, you know, is this a good thing?
So if we're voting on an idea, it's one thing, but if we're voting on idea plus the actual details of the idea, that's another thing.
Well, we're voting on, do we support, you know, these three bills
as written,
and we're not
right. But is there any you know, I understand. But it's just is there any tangible parts? Like we talked about a lot of wonderful things, and the slides have a lot of wonderful points that I completely agree with. I'm just thinking that when this gets presented next month, I think we should have that prepared. Right?
Could we vote on the proposals as written, and then in the course of those votes, if there's an opportunity for conversation where we say we want to pull certain things out or add more depth, then that's that writing process.
Right. I just wanted to kind of keep it you know, I just wanted it to look like that we know what we have prepared for the full board.
And it would be, presumably there would be a resolution post that we would all have an opportunity to.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
doesn't-
it
doesn't
would,
mean-
it would essentially say, we support this bill that does X, Y, Z.
Assuming that that's as written.
Right, right.
I meant to tell you as well that the city council has also issued resolutions in favor of all three of the pieces of legislation. I don't think I mentioned that before. I think I just talked about the state level.
And actually several other county councils have done it.
So it's, you know,
We can copy it.
9:40.
8:40.
I was gonna say, oh my goodness. My
I
bedtime.
propose that we
Late
vote on
enough.
them separately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not together, I think that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, but I think we should vote tonight.
I agree.
So, shall we start with the,
Second.
Mark Mayfield?
No, let's
Well, that's the hardest.
So you take the easy one, go with second one, get that solved.
So the,
Second look.
second look.
You have to take a second look at it now.
So,
Okay, so we're voting on whether to support the second look, which allows judges after 10 years. Also, there are provisions in if you committed the crime before 25, or you've been in prison after 55 also.
Assumption of it.
There's a, yeah.
all in
So,
favor?
all in favor?
Support as written.
Yeah,
Second one.
the committee members. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All opposed? Abstaining? 7-1. Nobody
7-0.
opposed. 7-0.
I'm a 0-1.
Right.
Don't forget your non-committee
No,
And
members.
non, yes, non-committee members in favor. Anybody online?
Someone was online, but I don't think it's here any longer.
Public member.
Seema is not on.
Did you know
That
public
vote on-
member?
part of the.
He's part of the committee.
Part of the-
Okay.
He votes with the committee.
Seema.
Yeah, she left.
Yeah.
She's no longer.
And, okay, so that passes.
Yeah.
And non-committee.
We did.
We
did
did,
that.
none. We have one.
One had it. Okay.
So,
Earn time.
turn time, okay. Second easy.
I could tell it.
Okay, earn time, all in favor?
As written.
As written, yes. 3, 7? Opposed? Abstaining? 1. Non-committee? Favor? Okay. Okay, was there one other?
Yes.
The Marvin Mayfield, get rid of mandatory minimums. All in favor?
Is there an opportunity to discuss?
Go, please.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so, obviously, I was.
Yeah.
I think that the thing that I'm open to having my mind changed here. The thing I'm struggling with is the second and third strikes. I think that's, getting rid of the minimums. While I have some reservation, and I understand, and I can sympathize with the perspective of the community member who's taken time out of his night to join us. I'm also open to the perspectives that you have shared, and considering that we have tried this and it seems to have failed, I'm open to try to come back and see if that works. But the second and third strikes feel a little bit harder for me because those are folks who have had an opportunity, will hopefully be entering a system where they have an opportunity to reduce their sentences, where their second looks if they're in such a situation. And if they are in that better ecosystem and they are still committing crime the second time, third time, I'm struggling to find the empathy that I have in other perspectives. But again, I'm open to hearing other people's perspectives. Mine change, but
I think I should explain too how second and third strikes work in New York. So essentially, the way that second and third strikes work is a second strike, you're considered a predicate felon if you have a prior felony conviction. It enhances your mandatory minimum.
Right.
So instead of it being 3.5 years on a first offense, it's 5 years mandatory minimum. If you have 2 convictions within a certain period, you can be considered a persistent felon, which means you are facing life. And it just elevates the mandate. So what second and third strikes do is essentially just elevate mandatory minimum sentences for convictions. Just so people are clear on like what second and third strike means.
And it feeds back into the plea bargain.
Yes,
loop.
right. So if you are, right now, somebody has 2 prior felony convictions, the situation that Judy described earlier, they're facing life on the back end when they see the judge. So anything that's less than
Without
that,
discretion.
without any discretion.
And
to
you
go
were saying
down.
earlier that this has written, the judge will still have the ability when reviewing these to say, you've
Yes.
gone through this, you did not take
Yes.
the opportunity to lower your sentence the first time, or maybe you did and you committed this crime the second time or a third time. And
I'm putting the life sentence on you because I think that's appropriate.
And there's still that, in the same way that it always exists in our judicial system, there's still judicial discretion.
Right. And also, I would say that when you're talking about, I mean, people think of sort of multiple convictions as sort of, someone who's like a, I don't know, doing armed robberies, because that's, there. But most of the times it means that they were addicts. And so it's sort of like saying all of that needs to be taken into account, but it shouldn't automatically just be like by the numbers. This means that.
Sure.
Because it really looks different if you're talking about, prior felonies than, and now you're dealing with, now you're dealing with whether or not you can go into rehab, or prior felonies, and it's because you're, you truly are persistent in wanting to.
And because of that, isn't it true that there's a high percentage of people who are both addicted, and other people who have mental illness in the
Enormous.
system, just because
They are,
they were
they are our
subject to
mental health
the
struggles,
strikes?
there's no doubt. Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
But for those, serial, let's just put it on the table, for the serial rapists.
Yeah.
Or the persistent burglars, and I'm not talking about the guys taking packages
Yeah.
out of the
Yeah,
foyer,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
talking about the guys climbing through your window to
Yeah.
take your stuff, and then you wake up and then we have a serious crime.
Yep.
Because I've represented these people, they're out there. The judge
Yeah.
still can slam them with the, third strike kind of.
Absolutely.
And the prosecutor can still leverage their bad behavior against them in the plea bargain process, saying, listen, man, if you take this to trial, you're going down. So take this deal now.
Yeah, I think it's.
So it's still
Yeah.
it just removes in the other kinds of cases where it is a person with an addiction problem. It gives the judge a little more discretion to understand it's this kind of case, not those kinds of cases.
Yeah, I think it's the fear of, no one wants to see the headline of someone who in a previous iteration of our justice system
Yes,
would have been required to be behind bars and would have committed an already committed act.
100%.
And
Yeah.
you feel a level of culpability or responsibility.
course.
In
Yeah.
a smaller way.
Absolutely.
And we're constantly legislating to those outliers,
Right.
to the detriment of the vast majority of people
Right.
who don't really have any political power. Talking about people that are poor, people that do have mental illness, they just have no political power. And the headline has a lot of political power.
bad facts make bad law.
I feel uncomfortable about the variation in the judge's rulings. I do think that we should get rid of mandatory minimum in our courts. But we have judges that will let everybody out, and we have judges who will let no one out. And this goes, I mean, there is, look, I know better. So there's this wide discrepancy. And we're leaving somebody's life up to who they happen to be in front of. There's something about it that's missing for me, that if we adopt the bill as it's written, it just leaves a hole. And I think it needs some discussion.
I agree with you. I have the same reservation. It needs to be refined, so it's more defined of what can be done with what, because I've lived through both situations and neither are good. So I'm hesitant if there was some guideline, extra guideline in there.
So
That might
when
be
I
helpful.
was, when we were younger,
Oh, yeah, we're still.
there were two criminal court judges who I think are representative of what we're talking about.
Yes.
One was Bruce.
Cut them
Bruce
loose.
Wright.
Yeah,
Cut 'em loose,
cut them
Bruce.
loose.
And then the other was Rothwax, who put everybody in for as much as he could. And they're on the bench at the same time.
Mhm.
So if you were going before Harold Rothwax, you might as well kill yourself because you weren't going to get any break for anything. And if you went before Bruce Wright, you'd get them all.
Right.
So I'm uncomfortable with that.
Well,
But except
Sarah,
if there was too much discretion.
isn't it the case that right now we have Rothwax down the line?
Yeah. It is a great point.
Right?
Talking about.
And by the way, they never said, when they did mandatory minimums, they didn't do the mandatory maximums. You know,
No,
this-
But aren't we talking about something coming at it from a different angle? I mean, the thing is, how are judges appointed?
Criminal court judges are appointed in New York City.
They're not
By-
appointed, we
They
vote for them.
In
That's
New
right.
York City by the mayor's committee on appointments.
Mhm.
And the mayor gets together a group of people, some are legal aid people, some are the prosecutors, and some are Pauls. And they sit together and they just opine about who should be criminal court judge for 10 years. That's how that's.
But the Supreme
But
Court
all
judges
That's
are imposing most
them.
of the felonies.
Yes.
Are elected.
They are elected.
And that's also.
Yeah, I mean, aren't there other states that do it better? Commissions from the ABA perhaps? Not be political, maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. I mean, we are criticizing the fact that there are judges at both ends
I'm not
of the
criticizing.
seesaw.
I'm not, you're missing the point.
Mentioning it, mentioning it, and that it can be an issue, but the justice situation is actually somewhat unfair. All of it depends on what judge you get, what lawyer you get.
That's what I'm saying, it's unfair.
But it's what we have.
So
You
maybe
can't say
just
we're not gonna have a
this
justice
resolution is not gonna
In the
solve it.
consideration of times, I know some members here are getting
Yeah.
busy to leave, can we vote on this one as written to see where we land and then
Yeah,
maybe take it from
that's a
there?
good idea.
Thank you.
Okay, all right.
So-
All
All,
in favor of getting rid of mandatory?
No,
As
no,
written.
no.
As
That's
written.
not-
No,
that's
that's
not
not what we're
as
talking about.
written.
no,
No?
no, this is the one.
Yeah.
This is. the-
Yeah,
we
this
are-
is
This
the
is
Marvin
what-
Manor.
We are on the
Yeah.
mandatory, that's the.
Yes.
The Marvin
May
Manor.
Marvin Manor.
Which eliminates mandatory minimums.
Eliminates
Yeah.
mandatory minimums,
Which
eliminates
As
the
written.
second and third
Yeah.
strike,
As
as
written.
written. All in favor.
1, 2, 3, 4, 4. Okay, all opposed? 1, 2,
Oh, wait a second, take mine back. No,
Just-
Saralee
I
says
wanna-
hers
one.
back.
Okay,
Abstaining.
you're abstaining?
Yeah.
Okay, all
I'm
abstaining?
abstaining.
because I want to
So
have.
three.
All right, we have 3
Abstaining.
abstentions? Okay,
Abstain.
and it fails.
So it was 4-1.
And it has to have.
It has to have a majority.
Yes, votes. And doesn't, it's.
Oh, it's 4-4.
Non-committee?
I'm voting for it, but it failed.
Did I count myself?
I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we can talk about it, revisit it.
We'll fix it up.
Not today.
We so appreciate your time and consideration. These are such
Yeah.
complicated issues. I mean, so it's hard to even get through it. We gave a lot of time for it. So
Yes.
happy to come back for
Really,
next.
really
Thank you.
This has been very educational.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. Thank you for coming.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have anything else? on the
Yeah.
agenda?
So, just one, we did have the, Saralee, we did have the district needs statement and the budget priorities on the agenda to talk about, given the late hour. I think we can
Thank
push
you
it
very
off.
much.
till-
Thank you,
Motion.
thank you all for being so
Thank you.
fun.
Motion to
Thank you
adjourn?
very much.
Motion
Yes.
to adjourn.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken and Saralee.
Thank you.
Bye, online.
What's the name of your